The ground gave way beneath his boots. Caleb Dawson stumbled, his fingers clawing at the slick face of red clay as rocks tumbled into the ravine below. For one breathless second, he dangled over the canyon edge, staring into the dark void beneath, a sheer drop of 60 feet. The echo of a desperate animal cry cut through the morning mist, wild and sharp, sending a chill through his blood. His grip slipped again, mud slicking the calloused palms that once steadied rifles. Above him, the sky was bruised gray, and thunder rolled like something ancient waking. He cursed under his breath, dragged himself back onto solid ground, and lay still for a moment, chest heaving, listening. The cry came again. Not a roar, not a snarl, but a plea. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Caleb rose slowly, his breath fogging in the early chill. The mountain around him was still half asleep, a world of pines and silence painted in the soft gray of dawn. But that sound, that heart-splitting cry had cut straight through the morning calm. He'd heard plenty of animal calls in his 50-odd years up here, but nothing like this. It was too raw, too filled with terror. It didn't belong in the natural rhythm of the wild. He brushed the dirt from his worn flannel shirt and glanced toward the eastern ridge. The echo had come from somewhere beyond it, near the abandoned copper pits, a place he'd avoided for years. A place people said the earth had swallowed and never spat back. He slung the coiled rope over his shoulder and muttered, "All right then, let's see what the hell you are." The air grew thinner as he hiked upward, each breath tinged with dust and pine sap. His knees ached with the old pain that came from too many winters alone, chopping wood and sleeping light. The forest was alive with small sounds, a squirrel's chatter, the rustle of wind-bent branches. But beneath it all lingered that strange cry, faint now, like a heartbeat fading into the hills. He stopped for a moment at a ledge where he could see the valley stretch out below. Morning light spilled across the land, turning the rocks copper and gold. It should have been peaceful, but Caleb couldn't shake the unease prickling at his spine. Something was wrong out here. He thought of Sarah, his wife, and the last time he'd heard a sound like that. It had been a hunting trip gone wrong years ago, when a shot had echoed and she'd fallen before he could reach her. Since that day, he'd sworn off killing. He'd left the rifle hanging above the cabin door as a reminder that some wounds can't be hunted away. And yet, here he was again, chasing the cry of something in trouble, something wild. Maybe because deep down, he still believed he owed the mountains a debt. The trail grew narrow, choked with sage and stone. Caleb's boots crunched through dry soil as he followed the echo down into the canyon's throat. The air smelled of wet clay, storm coming. He could taste it. His gut told him whatever was making that sound wasn't far now. He paused when he reached the old mining road, its gravel sunken and split by years of rain. Rusted machinery littered the slope, relics of another age. He crouched beside a broken signpost half buried in the dirt. McAllister Pit, keep out. He huffed a dry laugh. Yeah, he murmured, that always worked so well. Then the cry came again. Closer this time, sharp and desperate, the sound of something fighting for life. Caleb froze, every muscle taut. It echoed not from the pit itself, but from somewhere beyond, deeper in the brush. He pushed through the undergrowth, branches scratching his arms. The sound grew louder, frantic movement, low growls. He ducked beneath a cedar branch and stopped dead. Just 20 yards ahead, In a clearing dusted with early mist stood two mountain lions. A male, tall, powerful, with shoulders that rippled under tawny fur, stood guard beside a smaller, leaner female whose flanks heaved with rapid breaths. Both turned their golden eyes toward him. Caleb's pulse thundered in his ears. He'd seen cougars before, but never this close, and never like this. He slowly lifted his hands, palms out, voice low and even. "Easy there. I ain't looking for trouble." The lioness didn't back away. She took a few tense steps toward him, tail flicking, muscles coiled tight, then turned sharply and bounded a few paces back, glancing over her shoulder as if urging him to follow. She let out a cry, the same one that had lured him here. Caleb blinked, unsure if exhaustion was playing tricks on him. "You want me to come?" he whispered. The male growled, low but not threatening, pacing near the edge of the clearing. The lioness looked back again, desperate, then sprinted toward the ridge beyond the trees. Caleb hesitated only a second before his instincts took over. "Damn fool," he muttered, and followed. He moved carefully, keeping distance, his senses alive with danger. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Each step forward felt like crossing a line between the world he knew and something older, primal, a world ruled not by logic, but by instinct and faith. As they descended into a hollow filled with mist, the smell of wet earth grew strong. The ground squelched beneath his boots. That's when he heard it, a smaller, weaker sound beneath the wind. A gurgling cry, muffled by mud. The lioness skidded to a halt at the rim of a large depression, an old mining pit half filled with thick, dark sludge. She let out a guttural moan and clawed at the edge. Caleb stepped closer and froze. In the pit, a small cougar cub struggled, its body half submerged in mud, tiny paws flailing uselessly. Each time it tried to climb, the slick earth gave way, dragging it lower. Its cries were faint now, swallowed by the sucking pull of the pit. Caleb's throat tightened. He could see the mother's panic, the male's frustration as he paced the rim, throwing glances at Caleb like silent accusations. It all made sense now. The cries, the strange behavior, the pleading. They hadn't lured him for a kill. They were begging him to save their young. Caleb dropped to one knee, scanning the pit's edge, calculating the angle, the depth, the risk. He could smell the sour stench of wet clay. One misstep, and he'd join the cub in that grave. He whispered, almost to himself, "I can't do this alone." As if in answer, thunder cracked in the distance, echoing through the canyon. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and danger. Caleb looked up at the sky, a storm rolling fast, and then back down at the desperate faces of the cougar parents. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of what came next. Somewhere deep inside, the old hunter stirred again. Not the killer he used to be, but the man who knew that sometimes survival demanded more than strength. It demanded compassion. He took one steadying breath and stood. "All right," he said softly. "Let's get your little one out of there." And as the first drops of rain began to fall, Caleb Dawson stepped toward the edge of the pit, into the beginning of a trust no human or wild creature had ever dared before. The rain came down harder, drumming against Caleb's jacket and turning the edge of the pit into a slick mess of red clay. He wiped the water from his brow, studying the desperate dance of the cougar parents before him. The lioness paced tight circles, her tail twitching with panic, while the male crouched low, growling softly, a sound more wounded than threatening. Caleb had seen that kind of fear before, years ago, in the eyes of people searching for something they'd lost and couldn't get back. He crouched near the rim, testing the ground with his boots. The mud squelched, giving beneath his weight. "Too soft," he muttered. "If I go in there now, we all die." He glanced up at the two cougars. They stared back, muscles rippling under rain-soaked fur, their eyes glinting with animal intelligence. Caleb felt a tremor run through his hands. He was standing within 15 feet of two apex predators, creatures strong enough to rip him apart in seconds. Yet here he was, talking to them like neighbors. "Listen," he said under his breath, voice low and steady. "You got to trust me a little longer. I'm not leaving that cub." The lioness let out a guttural moan that rose and broke like a sob. It hit Caleb square in the chest. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know what that sounds like." He turned back toward his truck parked half a mile away, knowing he'd need tools. A plank, rope, anything to bridge the pit. But as he took one step back, the male growled sharply, blocking his path. The sound wasn't pure threat. It was fear. Caleb froze, raising his palms. "Hey, easy. I'm not running out on you." The lion's head lowered, eyes locked on his, then flicked toward the cub again. That was when Caleb understood. They didn't want him to leave. They were terrified that the only creature who could help might disappear too. Caleb slowly crouched, picked up a loose branch, and pointed toward his truck. "I'm coming back. Promise." He tapped his chest, then gestured toward the cub. "You watch him. I'll bring help." Maybe it was madness, but he swore the lion's gaze softened for a heartbeat before he backed away. He turned and jogged up the slope, mud sucking at his boots, lungs burning. By the time he reached his truck, rain had turned the dirt road into a ribbon of brown sludge. He grabbed a thick coil of rope, an old crowbar, and a plank of pine he used for crossing creeks. His breath came in sharp bursts. Somewhere behind him, the cub's cry had weakened, barely audible over the storm. As he loaded the gear, lightning flashed across the sky, and for a moment, he saw a figure down the road. A vehicle's headlights cut through the curtain of rain, drawing closer. Caleb squinted, tension rising until he recognized the Green Ranger truck. He almost groaned. Lila Grant. Of all the people to show up now. The truck rolled to a stop beside him, tires sliding in the mud. The door flew open and Lila jumped out, pulling her rain jacket tight. "Caleb Dawson, what the hell are you doing out here?" she shouted over the wind. "Saving a life," he said simply. She frowned, following his gaze toward the ridge. "Is that what I think it is?" "Cougar family, one's trapped." Lila's eyes widened. "You're kidding." She'd spent years studying mountain lions in this region, and years telling him to stay out of trouble. "You can't go near them, Caleb." "They'll tear you apart. Not today," he said, slinging the rope over his shoulder. "Today they need help." She stepped in front of him, rain streaking her face. "You've lost your damn mind." "Maybe," he said, brushing past her, "but I've got work to do." She followed him up the ridge despite herself, muttering under her breath. They climbed in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the slap of rain and the low rumble of thunder. As they neared the clearing, the cries grew louder again, a sound of both hope and agony. When they broke through the brush, Lila stopped dead. The two cougars were still there, drenched and pacing, their fur slick against powerful shoulders. The cub had sunk deeper into the mud, its small head barely above the surface. The sight stripped away every professional barrier she had. "Oh my God," she whispered. Caleb knelt beside the pit. "We don't have much time," Lila stared at him, torn between instinct and disbelief. Caleb, those are wild cougars. You can't just— I'm not asking permission, he said quietly, securing the rope around a nearby stump. You hold this end. If I slip, pull with everything you've got. Lila hesitated, looking at the animals, then at the man she used to admire, the hunter who'd once sworn never to interfere again. You really think they won't attack? They could, Caleb admitted. But if we do nothing, that cub's gone. And if there's one thing I've learned up here, you don't turn your back on something that's fighting to live. He anchored the plank over the pit and tested it with one boot. It creaked under his weight. The lioness flinched, muscles twitching, but didn't lunge. Her eyes followed his every movement. Rain pooled on his shoulders as he crouched low, spreading his weight evenly. The mud below bubbled, thick and dark, swallowing another inch of the cub's tiny body. Come on, little one, he murmured. Hold on. Lila braced the rope around her wrist, heart pounding. If you fall, I can't pull you both out. Then just pull me, Caleb said with a half smile. Cub's got better odds without me crushing it. She shook her head. You always were impossible. Yeah, he said. Guess that's why I'm still here. He inched farther out, plank groaning beneath him, one hand gripping the crowbar for balance. The cougars stayed close, every muscle tense. It was a strange, sacred kind of standoff. Predator and man bound by the same desperate purpose. Caleb reached the end of the board, stretching his arm toward the cub. His fingertips brushed slick fur, but he couldn't get a grip. He adjusted his position, leaning farther, too far. The plank shifted with a sharp crack. Mud splashed upward. Lila gasped and tightened the rope. Caleb! I got it! He shouted back. Almost! The cub whimpered weakly, its paw twitching toward him. Caleb lunged again, one hand sinking deep into the mud until he caught the scruff of the small neck. The suction fought back, tugging hard, pulling both man and cub downward. Caleb gritted his teeth, muscles screaming, every tendon straining. Don't let go, Lila cried, digging her heels into the mud, the rope burning her palms. I'm not, he growled. The plank buckled but held. The rain came harder, each drop a cold needle against his back. He could feel the cub's pulse fluttering beneath his fingers, faint but alive. He pulled again, inch by inch, until the little body slid free with a loud, wet gasp. Caleb fell backward onto solid ground, clutching the cub against his chest. It was barely breathing, eyes crusted with mud. The lioness moved instantly, not with rage but with fear. She stepped forward, emitting a low, trembling sound that seemed more plea than warning. Caleb set the cub down gently, backing away on hands and knees. The mother rushed in, licking furiously at the tiny form while the male stood guard, watching them all with golden, unblinking eyes. Lila stared, chest heaving, rain running down her cheeks. They trusted you, she whispered. Caleb stayed crouched, drenched and shaking. No, he said softly, eyes fixed on the mother and her cub. They just ran out of choices. Trust came after. The storm rolled overhead, the thunder fading into distance. The cougars huddled together, a small, trembling family made whole again. And as the rain slowed to a whisper, Caleb felt something shift deep inside him, a quiet recognition that the wilderness had just handed him back a piece of his soul. Behind him, Lila's voice was gentle, almost reverent. You think they'll make it? Caleb nodded slowly. If we don't interfere again. Yeah, they will. The lioness looked up once more, meeting his gaze. For a heartbeat, The world stilled. No wind, no rain, just the silent connection between grief, courage, and grace. Then she turned away, pressing her nose against her cub. Caleb exhaled, steadying himself against the mud. The job wasn't over. The cub was safe, but the mountain still held dangers. The pit would need to be filled, the ground made secure. But for now, as the light began to shift through thinning clouds, he felt something he hadn't in years. Peace that didn't hurt. He stood, the ache in his knees grounding him in the present. "Let's head back, Lila," he said quietly. "There's still daylight left, and a story to finish." As they walked toward the ridge, the wind carried the faintest sound behind them. Not a cry of fear this time, but a low, contented rumble. A thank you whispered in the language of the wild. And though neither turned to look, both felt the same truth settle in their hearts, that some debts between man and nature can only be repaid in silence. Lightning cracked across the horizon, splitting the fading clouds in two. The storm that had nearly swallowed them was drifting away now, leaving behind a world dripping with silence and the smell of wet pine. Caleb Dawson stood by the edge of the pit, his boots sunk deep into the softened earth, staring at the muddy chaos they'd just survived. The cub was alive, barely, nestled against its mother's flank, while the male stood guard. Every few seconds, the lioness glanced up at him, her eyes watchful, uncertain. Caleb felt the ache deep in his bones, but it wasn't just from the strain of the rescue. Something heavier pressed on him, an understanding that the day wasn't finished with him yet. "They'll be all right for now," he murmured, mostly to himself. "But that hole, that's a death trap waiting to happen." Lila, standing a few feet behind, nodded quietly. "That pit shouldn't even exist. I thought the old mine sites were all filled in years ago." She wiped rain and mud from her face, looking exhausted but restless. "This one's huge. Deep enough to kill anything that slips in." Caleb crouched, scooping a handful of thick red clay from the rim. "Man-made," he said. "And by the look of the runoff, it's been deepening with every storm. You'd lose more than a cub in there if someone wandered too close." Lila studied the steep sides of the pit, her eyes narrowing with worry. "We need to report this. The department can send a crew to mark it off or fill it." Caleb's voice was low but certain. "By the time they get out here, another storm could hit." "You know how long that process takes?" Lila crossed her arms, rain-soaked jacket clinging to her frame. "You're not suggesting what I think you are." He looked up at her, mud-smeared, hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were steady. "I'm suggesting we fix what we can before more lives get lost. Nature doesn't wait for bureaucracy." Lila sighed, frustrated. "Caleb, you can't just—" Before she could finish, the lioness let out a low growl, sharp and warning. Caleb turned quickly. The mother was standing tall now, her cub wobbling beside her. The male's tail lashed, cutting through the mist. They were tense again, senses alert. Caleb froze, realizing they weren't watching him anymore. Their focus was somewhere beyond the clearing. "Something's out there," he whispered. Lila instinctively reached for the radio on her belt, scanning the tree line. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet. Even the dripping rain seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound, faint, metallic, a chain dragging against rock. Caleb's stomach dropped. He knew that sound. "Bear trap," he muttered. Lila's eyes widened. "What? Who would—" "Poachers," Caleb said grimly. "Someone's been setting illegal traps around here. That's why the pit's open. They've been using it to snare game." Before she could respond, another sound sliced through the stillness, a wounded, choking growl from somewhere deeper in the woods. The lioness reacted instantly, snarling and stepping forward, torn between protecting her cub and answering the distress call of her own kind. Caleb grabbed Lila's arm. "Stay back," he said. "If there's another cat caught out there, she'll lose her mind trying to reach it." Lila hesitated. "We can't just let it die." Caleb looked at her. Mud streaked across his face, his jaw tight. "Then we do this smart. You circle north with the truck, keep your headlights on. I'll go on foot. We spooked the wrong animal out here. We're both done." Before she could argue, he was already moving. Lila cursed softly and turned toward the truck, radio crackling in her hand. The forest closed in around him as Caleb moved through the undergrowth, following the faint metallic rattle. The air was heavy and damp, the smell of blood faint but unmistakable. He pushed through a thicket of cedar, and there it was, a young male cougar, its front paw mangled in the jaws of a rusted steel trap. The animal was huge but helpless, eyes wide with agony and terror. It snarled when it saw him, teeth bared, muscles quivering. Caleb's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to back away, but he couldn't. Not after what he'd just seen. He spoke softly, his voice the same low, steady tone he used when calming spooked horses. "Easy now, boy. I ain't here to hurt you." The cougar's ears twitched, but its body stayed rigid. Caleb inched closer, scanning the trap. It was old, the kind outlaw hunters used decades ago, but still viciously effective. The jaws had cut deep into the animal's flesh. He knelt slowly, careful to keep his movements deliberate, non-threatening. His fingers brushed the cold metal, testing its give. The cougar growled, warning him to stay back. "Yeah, I'd be mad too," Caleb murmured. "But if you keep thrashing, you'll bleed out." Behind him, the faint hum of an engine signaled Lila's truck approaching. She appeared moments later, flashlight cutting through the mist. "Oh my God," she breathed. "That's a big one." Caleb didn't look up. "Trap's rusted but strong. We need leverage." She crouched beside him, eyes darting between the cougar's teeth and the blood pooling beneath its paw. "If we move wrong, it'll rip your throat out." "Maybe," Caleb said. "But it's either that or let it die slow." Lila swallowed hard and handed him the crowbar. "You always did have a death wish." "Not today," he said with a faint smile. "Hold the light steady." The cougar hissed as he worked, muscles convulsing in pain. Caleb pressed the crowbar into the trap's hinge and leaned his full weight against it. The metal groaned but held. Rain dripped from his chin, mingling with sweat. He pushed harder, every tendon in his arm straining. "Come on, you bastard," he growled through gritted teeth. With a sudden sharp crack, the jaws sprang open. The cougar yanked its paw free and stumbled back, blood spattering the ground. Caleb froze, half-crouched, waiting for the killing blow. But instead, the animal just stood there, panting, trembling, eyes locked on him. For several seconds, man and beast simply stared at each other in the dim light. Then, with a hoarse rumble, the cougar turned and limped into the trees. Lila exhaled shakily. "You're insane, you know that?" Caleb straightened, breathing hard. "Takes one to spot one." She almost laughed, though the sound came out hollow. "We have to report this. That trap was human. Someone's working these woods illegally." Caleb nodded, scanning the shadows. "And close enough to hear those lions cry for help." A chill slid down Lila's spine. "You think the pit was bait?" He looked back toward the clearing, the fading growls echoing through the canyon. Maybe not for them. But something's been using these mountains wrong. That pit wasn't just negligence. It was meant to kill. Lila's flashlight flickered against the trees, catching the glint of another metal trap half buried in mud. Her stomach turned. There's more of them. Caleb took a deep breath, jaw tightening. Then tomorrow, we start pulling every damn one of them out. They began the slow walk back toward the clearing. The air was colder now, filled with the metallic tang of storm and blood. The lion family was gone, vanished into the wilderness, their shapes lost in the veil of fog. As they reached the edge of the pit, Lila looked back once more, the image of the cub's terrified eyes still burning in her mind. "You think they'll come back?" Caleb's voice was quiet. "They're wild. They'll stay clear of us if they can." He paused, staring at the pit. "But if the people who set those traps return, we might not be so lucky." Lila glanced toward him, reading the resolve in his face. The storm might have passed, but something darker was stirring in these hills. Far off, somewhere deep in the canyon, a single roar rolled through the mist. Not of fear this time, but of warning. It was enough to send a shiver down both their spines. As the night closed around them, Caleb knew the mountain wasn't finished testing him. The rescue had been only the beginning. Something far more dangerous and far more human waited in the next dawn. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of dawn that looked half-hearted, as if the sun itself doubted it should rise. Fog clung to the mountains, wrapping the valley in a soft, uneasy silence. Caleb Dawson stood outside his cabin, a tin cup of coffee steaming in his hands, his eyes fixed on the tree line. The events of yesterday had left him sleepless, his mind replaying every sound, the cub's cries, the mother's eyes, the trap snapping open in his hands. He knew the cougars were alive somewhere out there, but the thought of the metal jaws lying in wait again twisted his gut. The mountain felt wounded, and the wound had a human name. He set his cup down and reached for his gear. When he slung the rope and crowbar over his shoulder, it wasn't just for rescue, it was for reckoning. He'd lived most of his life believing man's greatest mistake was fear of the wild. Now he saw it differently. Man's mistake was greed dressed up as survival. Lila arrived not long after, her ranger truck growling up the gravel path. She stepped out, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "You didn't sleep," she said, more statement than question. "Neither did you," Caleb replied, tying the rope tighter. She handed him a thermos. "Coffee. Figured you'd start without me." He gave a thin smile. "Figured right." They drove back toward the pit in silence, the truck bouncing over ruts, mist swirling around the headlights. The air smelled of wet cedar and rust. When they reached the clearing, the ground was slick with dew, the mud streaked with the tracks of the cougar family. They were gone, but their memory lingered in claw marks along the rim. Caleb stared at them for a long moment, as if reading a message only he could understand. Lila broke the quiet. "If poachers are operating out here, they're organized." "You saw that trap. It wasn't random. Someone's mapping these woods." Caleb nodded slowly. "And using the old mining roads to move without notice. Locals wouldn't risk it. Too dangerous. Outsiders, maybe." She frowned, scanning the forest. "Then we'll need proof before we can get a warrant." He met her gaze. "Proof means going deeper." Her lips pressed tight. "Of course it does." They loaded their packs and followed the trail where Caleb had freed the trapped cougar. The forest grew denser the farther they went. oak giving way to pine, pine to twisted juniper. The air felt different here, charged somehow. Caleb's instincts prickled. He'd been a hunter long enough to know when he was being watched. An hour into their hike, they found another trap. It was half buried in wet leaves, teeth glinting faintly. Lila knelt, photographing it with her phone. "Same design," she muttered. "Old, but the chain's new. Someone's maintaining them." Caleb crouched beside her, his voice low. "Someone who knows the mountain well enough to hide the evidence." Before she could answer, a twig snapped somewhere behind them. Both turned fast. Nothing but trees and fog. But Caleb's gut tightened. He reached for the knife at his belt. Reflex more than intent. "We're not alone," he whispered. Minutes stretched thin. Then another sound, a faint metallic clink, like something being dropped and quickly retrieved. Lila turned off her flashlight. "Maybe we should fall back. Call it in." Caleb shook his head. "If they hear us on the radio, they'll vanish. Let's keep moving." They pressed deeper into the woods, following the faint trail of footprints until they reached a clearing surrounded by boulders. There, beneath a tarp camouflaged with branches, lay a small camp. 2 folding chairs, a half-extinguished fire, and several steel traps stacked neatly in a crate. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Bingo," he muttered. Lila snapped more photos, her hands shaking slightly. "We've got enough to shut this down." "Maybe," he said, "but whoever did this isn't far." As if summoned by the words, a voice came from behind them. "You two lost?" They spun around. A man stepped out from the trees, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a mud-stained hat and a hunting vest. A rifle hung casually in his hands, the way a snake carries its fangs. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "This here's private land," he said. "Ain't safe wandering without permission." Lila flashed her badge. "Wildlife Services. You're trespassing and running illegal traps." The man chuckled, slow and mean. "Traps. Lady, I'm just keeping predators from killing livestock. Folks around here appreciate it." Caleb stepped forward, his voice rough but steady. "I've lived here 30 years. Ain't no ranch within 10 miles of this ridge." The man's eyes flicked to him. "Ah, the mountain man himself. Heard about you, Dawson. Used to hunt these parts, didn't you?" Funny how times change. Caleb felt the words like barbs, but kept his tone calm. "Funny how some folks never do." Tension crackled between them, thick as the fog. Lila's hand hovered near her radio. "Put the rifle down," she said. "We're leaving with that evidence." The man grinned wider. "You can try." Before he could move, Caleb's hand shot out, grabbing the barrel and shoving it aside. The rifle went off with a deafening crack, the bullet slamming harmlessly into a tree. Lila ducked, heart pounding. Caleb wrestled with the man, mud flying as they struggled. Years of mountain work had left him strong, but age dulled his speed. The man wrenched free, swung the rifle like a club, catching Caleb across the shoulder. Pain flared white, dropping him to one knee. "Caleb!" Lila shouted, lunging forward. She grabbed the crowbar from his pack and swung hard, hitting the rifle's stock and sending it clattering into the dirt. The man staggered back, stunned. "Run!" Caleb barked. They didn't wait to be told twice. They sprinted toward the ridge, branches slapping their faces, lungs burning. Behind them, the man cursed and shouted, but no more shots followed. When they finally stopped, half a mile uphill, both were shaking. Lila pressed a hand to her chest, gasping. "You just picked a fight with an armed poacher." Caleb winced, rotating his bruised shoulder. "He started it." She shot him a glare. "We're lucky to be alive." He nodded. expression grim. And now he knows we're on to him. The forest stretched quiet again, as if swallowing the violence whole. Caleb glanced back toward the fog-shrouded clearing. He'll move the traps tonight. By morning, the camp will be gone. Lila steadied her breathing. Then we go back at first light. I'll bring backup. Caleb looked toward the horizon where the clouds were beginning to thin, streaks of pale orange bleeding through. He's not the only danger here, he said softly. That cougar family's still nearby. If they cross his path again. He didn't finish. Lila followed his gaze, the same thought flickering in her eyes. Then we better find them first. They made their way back to the truck in weary silence, every shadow on the trail now feeling alive. Caleb's shoulder throbbed with each step, but his thoughts stayed locked on the mountains. The balance here was breaking, man against beast, greed against mercy, and he was standing in the middle of it. As the truck door slammed and the engine rumbled to life, Lila glanced at him, her voice quiet. You think this is still just about saving one cub? Caleb stared out the window at the fog thinning over the trees. No, he said. This mountain's crying for help. And if we don't answer, nobody will. As they drove away, a distant roar rolled through the valley, deep, resonant, alive. Lila looked toward the sound, eyes wide. Caleb didn't flinch. He just whispered under his breath, "Hold on, little one." We're coming far behind them. In the dying light, the poacher stood at the edge of his ruined camp, rubbing his jaw, hatred burning in his eyes. He watched the truck disappear into the mist and muttered, "Next time, old man, you won't walk away." The mountain swallowed his words, carrying them like a promise toward the storm waiting on the horizon. The wind had changed by dawn. It blew cold from the north, scraping through the trees and carrying the metallic scent of rain. Caleb Dawson stood by the truck as Lila finished loading her gear. Binoculars, extra rope, a tranquilizer rifle, and a field radio. Neither of them spoke much. The quiet between them was heavy, filled with the kind of tension that didn't need words. The mountain was awake, restless. Caleb could feel it in his bones. He tested his shoulder where the poacher's rifle had hit him. It still burned, but pain was an old companion. He'd work through it. He had no choice. "We'll start where the tracks split yesterday," he said, tightening the strap of his pack. "If they're still in the valley, the cougars will stick close to the high ridges." Lila nodded, eyes serious. "And if the poacher's still out there, then we're careful." They started up the narrow path cutting through the cedar woods. The air was cool and damp, the soil still slick from the storm. Shafts of sunlight broke through the clouds, touching the wet earth with silver. Caleb walked ahead, every sense alert, listening for the crack of a branch, the rush of distant movement. Lila followed close, her boots leaving careful impressions beside his. After an hour, they found what they'd hoped for and feared. Fresh cougar tracks. A family of 3. The prints were small and clustered together, the cub's paws lighter and scattered. Caleb crouched, running a finger along the edge of the impressions. "They're moving east," he murmured. "Toward the ridge." Lila frowned. "That's toward the poacher's camp." Caleb met her gaze. "Exactly." They pressed forward, following the faint trail that wove through the trees. The forest grew darker the higher they climbed, sunlight dimming under thick pine branches. Every few minutes, Caleb stopped to listen. Somewhere above, a raven cawed, its cry echoing through the canyon. It wasn't just the cougars he was tracking now. He could feel it. Someone else was moving through these woods, too. By mid-morning, they reached the upper ridge. From there, the valley stretched wide below, green and gold and scattered with mist. Lila lifted her binoculars, scanning the far side. "There," she said softly, "near the clearing by the old mine road." Caleb followed her line of sight. At first, all he saw were rocks and dead brush. Then he caught the faint shimmer of metal, a truck parked half hidden among the pines. He exhaled through his teeth. "He's back." Lila lowered the binoculars. "If he's setting more traps..." "He's not setting them," Caleb said. "He's checking them. We're too late to stop him." Without another word, he started down the ridge. Lila caught his arm. "Wait, we don't know if he's alone." Caleb looked at her, eyes hard. "If that family walks into one of his traps, we won't have time to debate." She hesitated, then followed. They moved quietly, staying low. The slope was steep, covered in loose shale that shifted underfoot. As they neared the clearing, voices drifted through the trees, low, indistinct, but unmistakably human. Caleb motioned for silence. Two men stood beside the poacher's truck. One was the man from yesterday, the broad-shouldered one with the cruel smile. The other was younger, lanky, nervous, glancing constantly toward the woods. "You said you cleared this place," the younger man said, voice uneasy. The older man spat into the dirt. "I did. That ranger and her old man won't come back." Not after last night. Caleb's jaw clenched. Lila's hand brushed her tranquilizer rifle, but he shook his head. "Not yet," he mouthed. They listened. The men loaded traps into the back of the truck, laughing. Then the sound changed, the sudden sharp cry of an animal. A whimper, small and terrified. The younger man froze. "You hear that?" The older one grinned. "Sounds like we caught breakfast." Caleb's heart lurched. He moved before he could think, pushing through the brush. Lila hissed his name, but it was too late. He burst into the clearing, mud splattering his boots. "Leave it!" he shouted. The men spun around, startled. The older poacher's grin vanished. "You again!" He raised his rifle, but Caleb was already moving. He slammed into the man, knocking the barrel aside as the gun fired wild into the trees. Lila ran out from behind him, leveling her tranquilizer rifle. "Drop it!" she yelled. The younger man hesitated, then bolted toward the truck. Lila fired. The dart hit his shoulder. He stumbled, tripped, and went down hard in the mud. Meanwhile, Caleb and the older man grappled. The rifle caught between them. The poacher snarled, "You should have stayed in your damn cabin!" He shoved hard, sending Caleb sprawling. Pain shot through Caleb's injured shoulder. Before the man could aim again, a sound froze them both, a deep, resonant growl. From the tree line, the mountain lion family appeared. The male first, head low, muscles tense. The lioness followed, her eyes burning gold. Between them, the cub crouched, trembling. The poacher cursed under his breath. "Hell no!" He fired once, missing wide. The crack of the gun echoed across the valley. The male cougar roared and leaped forward, closing the distance in a flash. Caleb shouted, "Don't shoot!" But it was too late. The rifle jammed as the man tried to chamber another round. The lion hit him full force, knocking him backward into the dirt. The gun went flying. Lila ran to Caleb, helping him to his feet. "We need to stop them before..." But Caleb shook his head. "No, look, the cougar didn't kill." The male stood over the poacher, growling low, teeth bared inches from his face. The man froze, breath coming in ragged gasps, paralyzed with terror. The lioness stood beside her mate, tail lashing, body coiled. But after a long, tense moment, she turned toward Caleb. Their eyes met. There was no rage in her gaze, no fear, only recognition. The same silent connection from the pit. She looked at him, then back at the man beneath her paws, as if asking a question only he could answer. Caleb took a cautious step forward. "It's over," he said softly. "Let him go." The lioness blinked, her chest rising and falling with deep, trembling breaths. Then slowly she stepped back. The male hesitated, snarling once more before retreating toward his family. The poacher lay still, shaking. You called them, didn't you?" he whispered hoarsely. Caleb stared down at him. "No," he said. "They came on their own." Lila moved quickly, kicking the rifle out of reach and pulling handcuffs from her belt. "You're under arrest for illegal trapping and assault," she said, voice steady. She secured him with efficient movements, while the younger one groaned, half conscious from the tranquilizer. Caleb's attention drifted back to the cougars. The family stood at the edge of the clearing, rain misting their fur. The cub mewed softly, brushing against its mother's leg. The lioness looked back once more, a brief, silent farewell, before melting into the trees. The forest swallowed them, leaving only the whisper of wind and the faint smell of wild earth. Lila exhaled shakily. "I can't believe they didn't attack." "They're not killers," Caleb said quietly. "Just survivors. Same as us." He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the clouds were beginning to break apart. Sunlight spilled through, catching the wet leaves and broken traps scattered across the ground. It wasn't victory exactly, but it was peace. Fragile, fleeting, and real. As they loaded the poachers into the truck, Lila glanced at him. "You think they'll come back?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Not for us. They've got what they came for." He looked toward the trees. "But if they do, maybe it won't be for help next time. Maybe it'll just be to remind us that trust goes both ways." Lila gave a tired laugh. "You talk like the mountain's listening." "It always is," Caleb said. "We just forget how to hear it." As they drove down the trail, the forest hummed quietly around them, alive, watchful, forgiving. In the distance, a faint roar rolled through the hills one last time, carried by the wind like a promise. Caleb glanced toward the sound, eyes soft. "Looks like they're saying goodbye." Lila smiled, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. "Or thank you." The truck disappeared into the winding road, leaving behind the clearing. Empty now except for the imprint of paw prints and footprints side by side in the mud, fading slowly under the morning rain. Beyond the ridge, thunder rumbled once. Not in anger this time, but like a heartbeat echoing through the wild that had just learned, for one fleeting moment, to trust again. The sun dipped low over the Arizona mountains, spilling gold and rose across the ridge. The storm had passed for good this time, leaving behind the kind of quiet that only comes after something wild has broken and healed again. Caleb Dawson stood by the open door of Lila's ranger truck, watching as the sheriff's deputies loaded the two poachers into a second vehicle. The younger one was groggy, still blinking through the effects of the tranquilizer. The older one, hard eyes, bloodied lip, stared daggers at Caleb but said nothing. Maybe it was fear, or maybe the memory of that mountain lion's breath hot against his face had stripped him of words. Either way, the mountain had spoken louder than any man could. Lila shut the tailgate with a metallic thud. "That's the last of them," she said. Her voice carried exhaustion and something else, a soft pride. "They'll be facing a long list of charges. Illegal trapping, possession of restricted firearms, assault on a federal officer." She looked at Caleb and added with a faint smile, "and assault on a very stubborn old mountain man." He chuckled under his breath. Guess I'll take that one as a compliment. For a moment, neither spoke. The deputies drove off, their tires crunching over gravel, leaving the two of them alone with the fading light. The valley below glowed like a painting, mist curling through pines, riverbeds glinting silver, the hum of crickets just beginning to rise. It should have felt like victory, but Caleb's heart carried the weight of something quieter. The cougars were gone, free again. That was what mattered most. Lila leaned against the truck, crossing her arms. You know, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before, she said softly. A wild animal protecting you instead of tearing you apart. Caleb nodded, eyes distant. Maybe they weren't protecting me, he said. Maybe they were protecting what they recognized. She tilted her head. And what's that? He took a slow breath. The part of me that's still wild enough to care. They stood together, the mountain wind tugging at their clothes. Caleb watched a hawk circling high above the canyon. It reminded him of Sarah, his late wife, the way she'd always said the wilderness was more than just earth and rock. It remembers. Those had been her words. Now he believed her. After a while, Lila spoke again. You could come back into town for a while, she said. Get that shoulder looked at, stay somewhere with real walls. Caleb smiled faintly. And miss the sunrise through that ridge? Not a chance. She sighed, half amused, half worried. You're impossible. Been hearing that my whole life. He bent to pick up the crowbar lying by the truck, the same one he'd used to pry open the trap. Mud still clung to its handle. He turned it in his hand, studying the dried streaks like they held some message. You ever think about how easy it is to destroy something out here? He asked quietly. One bad storm, one bad decision, and the whole balance shifts. But to save something, it takes everything you've got. Lila's gaze softened. That's what makes it worth it. He nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. They loaded the last of their gear into the truck bed. The forest around them seemed to breathe again. Birds returning to the branches, the scent of pine sweet and sharp in the cooling air. Caleb paused before climbing into the passenger seat, turning his eyes toward the far tree line. A shape moved there, just at the edge of the forest's shadow. For a heartbeat, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then the movement came again. A graceful step forward, the faint gleam of gold fur in the dying light. The mountain lioness stood there, her cub beside her, now taller, stronger, its coat sleek beneath the sunset. The male was behind them, a solid silhouette against the dark. Lila saw them too. Oh my God, she whispered. Caleb's heart caught in his chest. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The lioness stood utterly still, watching him. The cub made a small, curious sound, then pressed against her leg. The mother's eyes never left his. For a long, silent moment, the two worlds, man and wild, met again. No fear, no desperation, just understanding. A bond forged in mud and storm and trust. Caleb felt something loosen inside him, something that had been tight for years. He didn't raise a hand or speak. He just nodded once, slow and steady, the way you'd acknowledge an old friend. The lioness blinked, almost in answer. Then she turned, nudged her cub forward, and slipped back into the trees. The male followed, and in seconds they were gone, leaving only ripples in the tall grass and the sound of the wind. Lila exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. I guess that's goodbye. Caleb kept watching the empty woods. No, he said softly. That's thank you. The drive back down the mountain was quiet. Lila handled the wheel while Caleb stared out at the darkening horizon. Every turn of the road brought back memories. The pit, the traps, the roar in the mist. But under all that was something new, something clean. For the first time in a long while, the wilderness didn't feel like punishment. It felt like forgiveness. When they reached the turnoff for his cabin, Lila slowed. You sure you'll be okay out here? She asked. He smiled. I've got company? She frowned slightly, glancing around. Company? Caleb nodded toward the tree line. You just can't always see it. She laughed, shaking her head. You sound like a legend waiting to happen, Caleb Dawson. Just a man trying to do one good thing before the mountain calls him home? Lila's expression softened. You did more than one good thing. You changed how I see this place. He met her eyes, voice gentle. Then I did enough. She offered her hand, and he shook it. Take care, old man. You too, Ranger. He climbed out, boots crunching on gravel, and stood watching as her truck disappeared down the road. The forest closed around him again, quiet and familiar. The last light of day caught on the edge of the pit in the distance, now half filled with rainwater and earth, nature already healing what man had broken. Caleb turned toward his cabin. The sky above was painted in streaks of violet and fire, the first stars winking awake. Inside, the fire crackled to life as he poured himself a cup of coffee and sank into the old wooden chair by the window. The pain in his shoulder throbbed dully, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was proof that he'd chosen something better than fear. Through the open window came the distant sound of the wild, the whisper of leaves, the echo of running water, and faintly, so faintly he almost thought he imagined it, the low, rolling rumble of a cougar's call somewhere beyond the ridge. Not a warning, not a cry, just a sound that belonged here, part of the same heartbeat that pulsed through every living thing. Caleb smiled into the quiet. You're welcome, he murmured. The wind stirred, cool and gentle, brushing past the cabin walls like a sigh. Outside, the mountain slept beneath a blanket of stars, at peace once more. And for the first time in years, so did he. The story of man and beast, of trust and mercy, had come full circle. Neither owned the other, yet both had saved something precious. The mountain, in its quiet wisdom, would remember. Because in the end, Caleb Dawson had learned the oldest truth of all, that courage is not measured by the battles you fight, but by the kindness you choose when you don't have to. And somewhere in the darkness, a lioness lifted her head to the wind, her amber eyes glinting beneath the moonlight, before she disappeared into the wild that had finally found its peace. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.